Let's talk a little bit now about the Decalogue. There was a scholar by the name of Alt, A-L-T, Albrecht Alt, German scholar, who examined the legal material of the Bible in general. And he noticed that there were really two forms of law. There's conditional law and apodictic law. Conditional law is case law, casuistic law, and then there's absolute or apodictic law. He noticed these two forms. Casuistic law is the common form of law, the common form that law takes in the ancient Near East, and you've seen it in the Code of Hammurabi. It has a characteristic if-then pattern. Casuistic law tells you, for example, if a person does X, or if X happens, then Y will be the consequence. It can be complex, it can be quite specific. If X happens, Y is the consequence, but if X happens under these different circumstances, then Z is the consequence. And it can be quite detailed, giving 3 or 4 sub-cases with qualifications. Absolute or apodictic law, by contrast, is an unconditional statement of a prohibition or a command. It tends to be general and somewhat undifferentiated. You shall not murder. You shall love the Lord your God. An absolute law, apodictic law, is not unknown as a form in other ancient Near Eastern cultures, but it seems to be most characteristically Israelite. We find a great deal more of it in our legal collections in the Bible than anywhere else. The provisions of the Decalogue, and again, the translation 10 Commandments is actually a very poor translation. In the Hebrew, it simply means 10 statements, 10 utterances. These are the ones that are in some sort of legal form, are in absolute or apodictic form. The Decalogue is the only part of God's revelation that is disclosed directly to all of Israel without an intermediary. But its directives are couched in the masculine singular, so it seems to be addressing Israelite males as the legal subjects in the community. And the Decalogue sets out some of God's most basic and unconditional covenant demands. The division into 10 is a bit awkward. It probably should be seen as an ideal number, an effort to find 10 statements in there, because in fact there are really about 13 separate statements, and we see the fact that 10 doesn't work very well in a very interesting phenomenon, which is that so-called commandments are actually numbered differently by Jews and by Christians, and then even within the Christian community, different Christian denominations number the commandments 1 through 10 quite differently from one another. They disagree about what is number 1 and what is number 2 and so on. The first statements, either 1 through 4 or 1 through 5, depending on your counting, but the first group of statements concern Israel's relationship with her suzerain, with God. She's to be exclusively faithful to God. She's not to bow down to any man-made image. She may not use God's name in a false oath, right, to attest to or swear by a false oath. She's to honor God's Sabbath day and honor parental authority, which is arguably an extension of God's authority. The remaining statements then concern Israel's relationship with her fellow vassals, if you will. And they prohibit murder and adultery and robbery, false testimony, and covetousness. It's important to realize that the Pentateuch contains 3 versions of the Decalogue, and there are differences among them. The Decalogue is going to be repeated in Deuteronomy, chapter 5, and there are some minor variations. Specifically, you'll see that the rationale for observing the Sabbath is different. God's name in Deuteronomy 5 is not to be used in a vain oath as opposed to a false oath. There are differences in the meaning. And there are some more differences too in language. So what are we to make of this?